And if the title of my presentation seems out of place for this segment, it's probably because it is. I was supposed to be on the panel for tomorrow, but couldn't make it, and then I was slotted in for this one. So I tried to construct it to make it as relevant as possible for this, in keeping with the theme of the overall conference, and that is, of course, looking at carbon credits as a source of innovative financing for some of these projects. And as the minister said this morning, in order for this to operate in a very robust and transparent and confidence-building manner, the requisite kind of policy, legislative, administrative, and institutional framework needs to be put in place. I've always argued that you could have all the money in the world. We always talk about finance, lack of finance, but if you don't have the laws to use the money to implement, it's just a waste of time. So we see this as a critically important first step to this. And I'm technologically being challenged, you know. Oh, there we go. Okay, so a lot of this was said in the address that I read on behalf of the minister this morning. But just to remind you, what the article in the Paris Agreement, Article 6, can actually facilitate in the context of trading carbon. And that carbon could either be through removals from the atmosphere, like through the vetiver system. And I have a question which I'll ask now, but you could think about it. Have you quantified the amount of carbon that is sequestered by a single plant over the time? Good, you'll answer later on, because that's important. So we see, for example, that this trading aspect of carbon, whether it's avoiding emissions or whether it's being sequestered through forest-type projects, like the vetiver system, or reforestation projects, or rehabilitation projects like in the quarries and so on, that carbon has become a virtual commodity that can actually be sold for a price. And that commodity can now be used by countries to meet their international obligations to reduce emissions under the Paris Agreement. So it is a way, it is a market mechanism where this is now being traded virtually to meet international obligations. And of course, the demand for that has been triggered by the Paris Agreement, of course, and the commitments that countries have made and are expected to ramp up as of next month, actually, in the second round of NDCs. And I have it. Okay. I know why I'm holding it the other way. So the Paris Agreement is structured again in Article 6 that allows for trading of carbon in two broad categories. One is a centralized system that has oversight by a supervisory body, and the other accounts or caters for accounting for any bilateral arrangements that one country may have with another country, or a private sector entity in one country might have with another private sector entity in another country. All of this is governed has government oversight, because in order to participate in a market, you must have sign-off by the government, as opposed to the voluntary carbon market, which now enjoys some kind of active trading, but has no oversight by government. And that has implications. And why does it have implications is because the objective of the Paris Agreement is to ensure that all countries are doing the same thing. And of course, that builds mutual confidence. And that is to report. We've heard this morning of the dire consequences of reaching 2 degrees or 3 degrees warming. By the way, we have exceeded the 1.5 degrees already. I think that will be the norm in the next decade and a half, and we are headed for 3 to 4 degrees Celsius, a rise in temperature by the end of of this century. Just to give you an idea, if I digress a bit, permit me, Asha. At 1.5 degrees warming, between 70 and 90% of all coral reefs will disappear. At 2 degrees, virtually all will disappear. And we're talking about coastal erosion and vetiver. I don't know if vetiver can help at that stage of temperature increasing. But if you're headed for 3 and 4 degrees, who knows if life might even be possible. It might be possible, but certainly very difficult and uncomfortable. But that is what we are up against in terms of trying to get solutions. And the Paris Agreement Article 6 market mechanism is one way of trying to facilitate. We've heard this morning that some of the hard-to-abate sectors could be very difficult in terms of technology, interventions and options and so on. And this provides one way of trying to meet those challenges of hard-to-abate sectors. Of course, it is not the solution. So let it not be mistaken that the carbon market will solve the climate problem. It's not going to. But Article 6 provides some kind of governance framework on how this thing can be done internationally. So we see, the voluntary carbon market really is a market where businesses and individuals can purchase carbon credits to offset their emissions. And the offsetting emissions, we're now seeing, for example, that companies have set themselves, as we've heard this morning, the central bank, our own central bank, we heard from the deputy governor, they have set themselves a trajectory to net zero to reduce their emissions, or they will have net zero emissions. And some other companies, most of the multinational companies that operate here, I'm sure, already have instructions from their parent companies on commitments to reduce their emissions. So these companies can actually participate in the voluntary carbon market by purchasing carbon credits to offset or to meet those commitments. And they can engage in different types of projects to achieve that as well. So reforestation and afforestation will accrue to sequestrate carbon, renewable energy development, carbon capture and storage, and all of this will generate credits because the carbon is now sequestered, and that virtual, if you could account for the credits, then that could be sold. And the drivers of growth in the voluntary carbon market really are corporate net zero pledges, as we heard this morning, that is now expanding because the private sector has recognized their role in contributing to global sustainability. Consumer demand for sustainability. We have seen where shareholders are now demanding more of their companies for sustainable growth. And of course, reputational benefits, such as ESG reporting, environment, social, and governance reporting. And I should quickly add that we've heard a lot of that this morning, and we are contemplating now developing a framework for mandatory ESG reporting to provide standards so that everyone knows what they're going to report. This would help, of course, in creating that kind of transparency and as well accounting for some of the activities that are being undertaken by corporate entities in the name of sustainability. We've heard about the dangers of greenwashing and virtue signaling, where companies come under the bright lights and promise the world, and in the dark rooms at the back they do really not so good things. So the idea of the ESG reporting is really to lay a level playing field so that all is on the same page. No one can. This is really to minimize that kind of ESG. Greenwashing, if you want. So there are opportunities that are presented by the voluntary carbon market, and it should be seen as a complement, not as a competition, but as a complement to the centralized intergovernmental mechanism under Article 6, because it can provide for private finance mobilization, scaling ambition that encourages reductions beyond government targets, so that, for example, if the government has submitted through the intergovernmental process that is going to reduce emissions by X amount, that could actually be exceeded by companies and private entities raising their own ambition. And so as a country, because the government and private sector in the context of a state can't operate separately. When the country accounts internationally for its emissions, it's the country's emissions that regardless of who emits, it belongs to the country. So that the collaborative aspect of this, of course, should be encouraged and should be seen as the complement. Of course, innovation and speed, it promotes innovative solutions and fewer bureaucratic delays, which governments are very, very famous for. And we find that the private sector has more efficiency when it comes to those sort of things, and of course provides direct finance to areas outside of NDC. So for example, our NDC covers only 3 sectors: the transportation sector, I think you mentioned it, the transportation sector, power generation, and the industrial sector. We don't cover, at least not yet, but we are doing the analysis now to make sure that we have it proper. We don't cover waste, for example, emissions from waste or from agriculture, or sequestration from forestry, for example. So the voluntary carbon market can actually provide the catalyst for expanding commitments outside of the formal NDCs. The challenges, of course, is double counting, the quality of the credits, the transparency, the lack of global oversight can lead to leakage, and erode confidence in the market. And of course, fragmentation, which is undermining the intergovernmental sort of oversight under the Paris mechanisms. So in order to create that policy framework that I alluded to, that will increase transparency, that will increase accountability, and that will increase confidence in the market, because no investor would want to go into a market or invest in a market that is wishy-washy, where you have no certainty, you have no accountability. I think the private sector will understand what I'm talking about. And therefore, the need for that kind of robust policy framework is critically important. So there's a need to harmonize the existing policy framework to ensure that the VCM standards are consistent with Article 6. Critically important is safeguarding environmental integrity to ensure that the credits that are generated by a project, whether it's afforestation, reforestation, sequestration, represent additional, and represent, most importantly, verifiable reductions. And the verification must conform to certain international methodology and standards. The corresponding adjustments, the minister's speech this morning alluded to potential burdens on states for applying corresponding adjustments. So maybe I could explain in more detail. So if I'm country A and you're country B, and I have excess, you can't meet your targets, but I can meet mine very easily. And I've exceeded my targets, and I have all of these credits to sell. You can buy the credits and then claim that against your target. That means if you do, then I can't use those credits to claim my target. In fact, what I need to do is add it back to my NDC. It's called the corresponding adjustment. And that is to ensure environmental integrity. There's no double counting. There's no leakage, what we call leakage in the lingo, of emissions. And of course, to prevent false accounting. So the corresponding adjustments can pose burdens to countries where this, so ensuring that we understand when we do a trade, what the implications are is critically important. Otherwise, you can really end up in a situation that might not be too pleasant or could be unduly burdensome. And of course, bridging the finance gap, which we heard about this morning, using the VCM to complement but not necessarily substitute the government commitments under Article 6. So the policy recommendations on the way forward in developing this policy framework is to develop a clear governance framework. Governance, again, meaning all of the things that go with it, for the voluntary carbon market to align with the centralized oversight system of Article 6 principles of no double counting, environmental integrity, and so on and so forth. To strengthen certification schemes to improve the credibility of carbon credits, so that when you generate carbon, whether it's through a forestry project, that carbon can withstand scrutiny in terms of its quality, that it has been verified, the carbon sequestered if you say X, the certification can vouch that it is X because it certifies that it is X and not less than that. And of course, encourage public-private collaboration to harmonize voluntary and compliance markets. And of course, promote education, and let me congratulate IAMovement for doing this here now, on carbon trading to raise awareness among stakeholders. And I think, if I'm correct, no, I'm not correct, but these are some of the real-world examples that have been actually already illustrated in the previous presentation. So reforestation projects in developing countries can be financed by the VCM, for example, that contribute to sustainable development and emissions reductions. The corporate use of the VCM to offset emissions as well. So the challenges in ensuring alignment with host countries' NDCs and the implications of applying VCM and selling credits and what it might mean for the state and their corresponding adjustments to their NDCs. And of course, pilot programs between countries on a bilateral basis can also raise the kind of finance that is critical for addressing climate action. What is required then is a shared responsibility. It is recognized that the voluntary carbon market, even though it is not centralized, even though there is no governance framework, is a tool to fight climate change, but must align with the Article 6 by harmonizing policies, strengthening standards, and fostering collaboration. I think with this, we can build a carbon market that inspires ambition, that protects the planet, and uplifts communities. And I think that is actually my last slide. Thank you very much.